Hello, Rosebuds! Welcome back! Today we've got two ghostly tales I'm sure you're going to love. If you're new to our content, all of our stories feature ghosts or the paranormal, and they're either completely fiction or based on a true story. You get to decide as you listen, but make sure to listen all the way to the end where I will reveal truth or fiction. Casper, Our Family Ghost by Natalie Kotz. When I was growing up, my parents bought a fixer-upper in a nice suburban neighborhood. The house had been owned by an elderly couple who'd loved their house. They tried their best to take care of it. As they got older, that had become more and more difficult. So they decided it was time to move into an assisted living complex. When I became an adult, I would learn that the elderly couple could have gotten a much higher price, but they were holding out to sell it to just the right family? Apparently, that was us. The house came with a ghost problem. I guess it wasn't really a problem, more like an understanding. Knowing my parents, they probably thought the elderly couple was a bit senile when they told them about the ghost that lived there. "It's not a scary ghost, but he certainly has a personality," the older lady had told them. "He can be a little uppity sometimes, but you don't let him push you around. I think he'll be pleased with you and your brood." I can just imagine my father's face as this elderly woman was saying this to him and using the word brood to describe his family. Mom and Dad were both academics. We jokingly called the ghost Casper at first, but I don't think he liked that. We could never tell if it was a he or she, but we just started using the he pronoun and it stuck. The first paranormal incident happened at dinner one night. This was about a week after we moved in. My family consisted of me, my baby brother, who was younger by 6 years. At this time, he was about 1, making me 7, and there were my parents. My mom was feeding the baby, as that's what we still called him, and my parents were chatting. I was totally engrossed in reading my comic book. I was just starting to understand the joys of reading. Even if it was comic books, I was enthusiastic and my parents were thrilled. There was a glass pitcher of lemonade on the counter that had been taken out of the fridge but not put back. There wasn't much in it, but as my parents were talking, I do remember Dad making a joke about Casper the Friendly Ghost. And all of a sudden, the pitcher goes flying off the counter onto the floor. Of course, we all turned and stared at it. I looked to my parents for an explanation, but they were just looking at each other and the glass on the floor. The conversation after that was less animated. The mood in the room had shifted. And even at 7, I can remember my parents were being less bubbly and more serious. The next incident occurred when I was laying on my stomach reading my comic. I had the book on the bed and my hands propped under my chin as I read. The pages suddenly started turning one by one. I slapped my hand over the book to stop the turning. At first I was shocked, but I'm surprised that even at that age, I was actually more annoyed. I said out loud, "Hey, stop it!" Then I pulled my hand away from the book and it stopped. I would learn later that Dad had his own experience that turned him away from brushing things off as mere coincidence to a believer. Dad had pretty bad nighttime heartburn. He'd run out of Tums in the upstairs bathroom, so in the middle of the night he realized he had to go check the downstairs and see if we had any. He was half asleep and not paying attention. His foot slipped, and he could feel that split-second moment before he knew he was about to fall. Then, like a massive force of nature, something shoved him in the other direction. It pushed him so hard, he actually fell backwards on the stairs. He had a bruised tailbone, but he would retell the story, and he'd always say, "Better than a broken neck." Mom's big experience wasn't quite as drastic as Dad's. She said that one day she was out hanging laundry. It was the early 2000s, but in the spring she still liked to hang the sheets outside like her mother did. She said all of a sudden, for no rational reason, she got this sudden urgency that she needed to go back inside. Being a stubborn woman, she ignored the feeling, with the logic that she'd finish hanging the sheets and then she would go in. Out of nowhere, she hears a disembodied voice practically scream, "Now!" At this point, she did go inside. She walked right into the living room where my baby brother, who was nearing 3 at this point, had somehow gotten a hold of one of Dad's screwdrivers and was messing around with a light socket. He was singing the Bob the Builder song. My mom practically screamed and rushed to take the screwdriver from him. I guess he started crying and my mother had to calm him down and try to explain to him why he couldn't fix the light socket with one of Daddy's real tools. There were other times that our ghost wasn't so benevolent. I remember this one time we were having a birthday party for my little brother in the backyard. He was lucky to have been born in the summer. My parents had this thing about making certain landmark birthdays monumental. 5 years old was one of those birthdays for us kids because we were entering school upon turning 5. They didn't normally pull out the stops, like the bounce house or hired costume mascots, but for 5 years old, they did. Other in-between not-so-monumental birthdays, we did a family thing and were allowed to invite a friend. So when they threw a party, it was huge. I remember sitting off in the corner, being a tween and not too thrilled to be surrounded by what seemed like millions of minions running around. I was just sitting observing all of my brother's friends when I noticed this one kid kind of sitting alone at a table. He had a piece of cake in front of him and he was fixated on it, and he was picking at it with his fork. He wasn't eating the cake or ice cream. He looked miserable. I was just starting to go through a mental list of reasons why he might be so down when all of a sudden I see his paper plate with cake and ice cream on it tip upwards in a quick motion and hits him right in the face. He starts crying, and a bunch of moms, including mine, rushes over to see what's going on. He was too distressed to explain what happened. I felt really bad for him, but I was nearly 12 years old at this point, so I didn't stay sympathetic for too long. Later, I did tell Mom about it, and she said, "Yeah, I figured it was something like that." "Really?" I asked. "How did you know?" "I'm always on edge that something like that is going to happen when we have guests over." I guess that experience tipped my brain off to a strategy I would employ as I got older and had my own guests come over. I never seemed to have mishaps like that when I had sleepovers or just hung out with friends. I'd like to believe that's because I'd actually taken to standing in the middle of my room and saying out loud, "Hey, ghost, I don't know if you can hear me, but behave yourself today. I don't want you to scare off my friends." I'd be pretty forceful about the tone I used, and surprisingly, it worked. He'd never messed with me and my friends. Mom and Dad and my brother, on the other hand, did have more incidents, like the cake and ice cream incident. Like, Mom had an ongoing book group, and I'd hear her telling Dad that the ghost was flipping the ends of Mrs. Harding's hair. Mom had been all flustered, hoping that the lady wouldn't notice, or just chalk it up to the wind or a draft from the AC. Strangely, when I look back on it, the ghost seemed more active in the spring and summer months. I'm not sure what that was about. Maybe my memory of the incidents just coincided with those months. Anyways, it's been many years since then. My parents sold that house just after my brother moved out and went to college. They didn't want to deal with the upkeep either, and they seemed happy to retire early and go tour Europe, which had been a lifelong dream of theirs. As for the house, I've always wondered if the new owners inherited the ghost as well. And whenever I'm around my parents, we never talk about it anymore. It seems taboo. I'd really like to ask them if they told the new owners about him, like the previous ones told them. I do wonder about it from time to time. but I guess I'll never know. The Child's Toy by Michael Roberts. My only sibling and younger sister by 3 years lives a few states away, but comes to visit every now and again. It's an easy drive considering we live in the New England region. We both have children and families of our own now and like to get the cousins together as often as possible. One day we're having one of our little family reunions. The kids are off playing and my sister and our spouses are sitting around reminiscing about the good old days. We're all enjoying a good bottle of red wine my spouse had bought for the occasion. My sister says, "Hey Greg, you remember that haunted dog toy? Whatever happened to that thing?" I'd totally forgotten that toy and the suspicious incident. But then suddenly the whole incident comes flashing back into my memory clear as day. Perhaps it was the wine, or just the good vibes all of us were feeling. But it was crazy how all the details came back in a rush. As a kid, I had all my toys up on a shelf in my bedroom. One of them was a barking dog toy. The robotic ones that bark, walk, and flip over in a repeating loop. Now, you have to understand, my sister and I used to fight like a cat and dog. Our arguments were intense when they happened, but we never held a grudge, and obviously, we remained close through the years. One day, we're both playing in my room and an argument flares up between us. It was likely over something very trivial because I can't recall the reason for the spat. Even though I just had this vivid flashback, I wasn't able to remember the details of the argument. Just that our argument had been very heated and escalated quickly. At this point, the dog on my shelf came to life. It started barking and walking. Both of us became silent and stared at the toy in disbelief. The dog continued to move, yapping away until it walked right off the edge of the shelf and landed on the floor. It lay on its side as its legs continued to wiggle. It kept on yapping for what seemed like a long time. Then it just stopped. I hadn't played with this toy for over a year, and given the eeriness of what had just happened, I was hesitant to go pick it up. Realize both of us were old enough to understand the basics of how electronic toys functioned when this incident occurred. My sister was looking at me to investigate. To save face, I couldn't reveal how scared I was feeling, so I went over and picked it up. I nearly dropped the damn thing when I noticed that the battery compartment was empty. It was the only power source for the toy. Furthermore, the switch was in the off position. I didn't say anything to my sister. We just sat there in stunned silence and discomfort. I can't remember exactly what happened next, but I think we unanimously decided to go outside and play. Back to the present, and we're all standing there thinking about the incident. My sister says, "I wonder if it was Nana." "Remember how she used to break up our arguments?" I said slowly. Another long pause of quiet contemplation. Our Nana had passed away only a few months prior to the incident, and she was a very loving woman who hated when we would fight. She never broke up our arguments by yelling at us. She'd always distract us with an activity or a baked treat and say, "Hey, you two, would you like to go check out these big red tomatoes in my garden?" Or, "Hey, you two, would you like to see what Grandpa is making in the workshop?" By diverting our attention, we'd inevitably forget about our childish disagreements. It had never occurred to me until now that the strange dog toy incident might have been the spirit of our grandmother. "Did you two have any other paranormal kind of stuff happen in your home?" my brother-in-law asked. "No, that was the one time," my sister replied. My sister and I gave each other a long, knowing look. We could both feel that this was the most logical reason that the toy would have no power and yet magically come to life. Looking back on this memory, I feel both amazed and creeped out that it was probably our grandmother. I honestly have no other explanation. I hope you enjoyed those 2 stories. Do you have any theories yet? Which one was the real story and which one was fake? I'll tell you which was which in a moment. First, are you a writer? Do you have a creative paranormal story or true ghost tale that you'd like to share? Soon, we're going to be running a story contest where you can win $100 and be featured on our channel and podcast. So sign up for our newsletter at blackrosereads.com to get in on that. Also, to my fellow writers out there, if you love our content and want to support us so we can keep creating ghostly tales, check out our exclusive journals and notebooks. Many of them have creepy horror-esque covers. I upload new ones about every other month, so I'm sure you'll find something you'll love. You can find those at blackrosepress.art. That's blackrosepress.art. I'll put a link down in the description for both the story contest and the journals. All right, on to the reveal of truth or fiction. Story number 1, Casper, Our Family Ghost, was by Natalie Kotz, was a true tale of paranormal comedy. Story number 2, The Child's Toy by Michael Roberts, was our fictitious ghost tale today. Thank you so much to both Natalie and Michael for those stories. I thoroughly enjoyed both of them, and I hope that you did too. Thanks for listening today. That's a wrap, Rosebuds. Until next episode, take care and stay creepy.